"Hey, watch your step!" a man shouted as he saw Brian nearly trip on the uneven curb. Brian jerked back just in time to avoid falling, then leaned against the nearest lamppost, breathless. Sweat dripped down his temples, mingling with the humid heat of that stifling late summer night in Rio. The small side street off Avenida Atlantica was dimly lit, and the scent of boiled corn, burning charcoal and sea air mixed with the muffled sounds of waves and scattered laughter coming from a group up ahead. He clutched his backpack tightly. His light dress shirt clung to his back. He stopped again to check his phone, dead battery. He sighed, frustrated. He didn't know this part of Rio very well. The rideshare driver had dropped him off 2 blocks short of the right spot, and now he was walking in circles, trying unsuccessfully to find the Copacabana Palace. When a group of teenagers passed by, laughing loudly, he instinctively moved to the edge of the sidewalk, avoiding eye contact. One of them made a joke in Portuguese that he didn't understand, but the mocking tone didn't need translation. Then, as he turned a corner, he saw a woman pushing a wooden cart covered by a blue tarp. She had a tired but determined posture, her step steady despite the incline. The soft squeaking of the cart's wheels on the asphalt had a kind of rhythm, almost comforting. "Excuse me," Brian said as he approached. "Could you help me? I'm trying to find the Copacabana Palace." Joanna stopped and looked at him for a moment, squinting. She took in his pressed shirt, the American accent, and the uncomfortable sweat on his face. Then she glanced at the empty street ahead and said, without taking her hands off the cart, "You're a bit off course, I'll take you. It's on my way." Before he could say anything else, she was already moving again, and he followed, slightly awkward. "Are you sure I can pay you for the help?" he said, picking up his pace to keep up with her. She looked sideways at him, not slowing down. "I don't sell kindness." As she spoke, she subtly adjusted something taped to the side of the cart with her free hand. Brian noticed, though he couldn't say why the gesture felt intentional. It was a small drawing taped down with clear plastic. In it, a smiling child held a coconut sweet. "Is that your son?" he asked. "Yes." "It's a good drawing." Joanna nodded silently. The quiet between them was filled with the sound of the nearby ocean and the scattered voices from the still open beach stalls. At the next corner, an older man wearing a cap and selling popcorn saw them pass. "Good luck, Joanna, take care of the gringo," he called out, laughing. She replied with a simple wave. A moment later, a woman stopped at the cart and bought a coconut sweet, trading a few coins with Joanna. Before walking away, she gave Brian a curious glance. "If he tastes your candy, he'll never want to leave." Joanna gave a soft laugh. Brian didn't catch the exact words, but from her tone he figured it was some kind of joke. The walk was short but long enough for him to notice how she navigated puddles, avoided potholes with precision, and greeted familiar faces along the way. It was as if she were part of that stretch of city, like the street was a natural extension of her. When they reached the hotel, he recognized the grand building with its white lights shining through the palm trees. He stopped, relieved. "Thank you. Really? Let me at least pay for a coconut sweet." Joanna was already turning the cart around. "Just try not to get lost again." Brian stood there, watching as she disappeared into the shadows of the street. The sound of the cart faded until it was gone. At the front desk, as he picked up his room key, he heard one of the staff say to another, "She sells on the beach every day, post 5. He went up to his room without a word, but the idea was already spinning in his head. The image of her pushing the cart, the child's drawing, the steady look in her eyes. Something about that woman stirred something in him he didn't know was still there. In the room, he pulled off his soaked shirt and lay down without even turning on the AC. He stared at the ceiling, trying to understand why such a simple encounter was stuck in his mind. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't want anything from him. No favor, no deal, no expectations. He came from a world where every act of kindness had a price, where everything was measured in returns, in cost, in interest. That night, for the first time in a long while, Brian fell asleep thinking about someone who didn't belong to his world, but maybe had something his world was missing. The sound of waves crashing against the shore blended with the shuffle of flip-flops along the boardwalk. Brian walked slowly along Copacabana's beachfront, now under the soft light of a Rio morning. He wore a light blue polo shirt, sunglasses, and the same sneakers from the night before. The sweat wasn't as bothersome as the persistent hum of doubt he'd carried since waking up. That woman with the candy cart, Joanna, had left a mark on his mind. Not just because of her gesture, but because of her eyes, the confidence with which she moved through those streets, as if everything there belonged to her. He walked distractedly, watching the carts lined up along the sand. One sold puffed tapioca biscuits, another popsicles, another offered nuts in improvised packages. It was a whole line of little roaming worlds, and each, despite their differences, carried a story between the lines. And Brian was looking for one in particular. As he walked, the sun began to gather strength, making the ocean sparkle like a tray of liquid silver. He headed toward Post 5, as he'd heard at the front desk the night before. On the way, without realizing it, his feet carried him into a memory, a small neighborhood in Boston. He was a teenager, helping his father stack cereal boxes on the shelves. The store smelled of coffee and old wood. A radio played something old in the back room. It was a simple, busy neighborhood store. His father knew the customers by name. "Every penny has to mean something to the people who walk in here," his father used to say, scribbling orders in a thick notebook. "No one comes back if we treat them like numbers." That's when Brian learned about value. Not the kind you count, but the kind you feel. Years later, though, when the store was sold to pay off the family's debts, he learned about loss. And since then, his world had revolved around a different kind of value: profit, yield, return. Back in the present, the smell of toasted coconut snapped him out of the memory like a clap. Looking up, there was the cart. The same cart with the blue tarp, now parked under the sun with a yellow umbrella overhead. The drawing was still taped to the side, the smiling child holding a coconut sweet. Joanna was surrounded by customers. She moved quickly, handing out wrapped cocadas, accepting bills, and giving change with practiced hands. Brian stopped a few feet away, watching. She looked different in the daylight. Her hair was tied in a loose bun, her face lit by the sun, and her eyes alert to everything around her. There was something steady about her, like she belonged to the scene and yet always seemed ready to move. He waited for the small line to shrink before approaching. "Good morning." Joanna looked at him, surprised for just a second. "Oh, the lost guy from last night. Found your way back then?" Brian smiled, relieved by her light tone. "I did, thanks to you." "What kind of cocada do you want? Today I've got traditional passion fruit and pineapple with cinnamon." "One traditional, please." She wrapped it and handed it over, like she would with any customer. "How much?" "3 reais." Brian pulled out a 20. She took it, opened the cash box, counted out the change, and held it out to him precisely. "Keep the change," he said. Joanna looked up. "I'd rather not. It gives the wrong impression." He hesitated, then took the change. "Well, thank you. Really?" She nodded, already turning to help another customer. Brian stepped aside, but not far. He sat on a nearby bench, nibbling on the cocada slowly. It was just the right sweetness, with the warmth of a grandmother's kitchen. As he ate, he watched the flow of customers. Within 15 minutes, he noticed her refusing to keep the change more than once. An older man paid with a 10 and she gave back 7. A young woman handed over a 5 and Joanna returned 2 coins. It was as if every cent had a purpose, a justification. It reminded him of his father's store, of the scale that had to be fair. Joanna remained steady, wasting no time, her gestures repetitive but never robotic. With each sale, a polite response, a restrained smile. It wasn't coldness, it was focus. Brian felt a growing curiosity, not just about her, but about what drove her to move with such determination. That gesture the night before hadn't been luck. He was sure of it now. He finished the cocada, stood up, and walked back over. "It was delicious. I'm glad. Come back any time." She was already putting some sweets away in the cooler beneath the cart. "Do you always sell here?" he asked. "Whenever the weather allows. Sometimes it rains, sometimes the inspectors get in the way, sometimes I run out of gas. But most days, yeah." And you do it all by yourself? She paused for a moment. Yes. Before he could ask more, another customer arrived. Joanna turned, handed over a pineapple cocada, accepted the money, and again returned the exact change. Brian stood there for a few more seconds, but he got the message. She was working. It wasn't just a job, it was urgency. And he was, in that moment, just another face in the crowd. He stepped back, nodded, and slowly walked away, down the sand. There was no goodbye. Just the image of her standing there, sunlight on her face, eyes sharp on every customer. He walked until he was out of her sight, but something told him that this wouldn't be the last time they met. "Do you want another cocada? Or did you just come to make small talk?" Joanna asked without looking up. Brian stood there for a second, unsure whether to laugh or back away. "Maybe a bit of both." She gave a half smile but kept arranging the sweets on the tray. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the morning breeze made the boardwalk more pleasant than on previous days. It was the third time that week he'd shown up, always at the same hour. And each time, he found Joanna already set up with her cart, the umbrella tied down with improvised ropes, and the cooler neatly secured on the side rack. "You're early today," she said, grabbing a cloth and wiping down the cart's counter. "I figured this would be a good time to talk. No lines, no distractions. It's never that quiet around here." Brian looked around. Sure enough, even this early, the beach was already moving. People jogging, riding bikes, walking dogs, setting up umbrellas. "Yesterday you seemed too busy to talk," he said, "so I thought I'd try again." She looked at him for a moment, trying to decide whether his persistence came from pushiness or just curiosity. "And what exactly do you want to know?" "Nothing major. I just wanted to understand how someone so..." He hesitated. "So what?" "So determined turns down help so fast." Joanna took a deep breath, pulled a cocada from the cooler, and wrapped it in wax paper. "Because sometimes help comes with a price we can't afford." Brian nodded slowly. "Not mine. You say that because you come from a different world. What if I wanted to invest in your business?" She stopped. Not dramatically, but in a real, instinctive way. "Invest? Yeah, money so you could expand, buy better equipment, maybe hire someone to help. No strings. No contracts." Joanna rested both hands on the cart and finally looked at him firmly. "You think I'm sitting here waiting for someone to show up with a solution? That I stand here every day counting coins, dreaming of some foreign savior?" Brian blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in her voice. "That's not what I meant. But it's what you offered." She grabbed a water bottle from the corner and took a sip before continuing. "I don't want to depend on anyone. Not to push uphill, not to sell cocada. If I fall tomorrow, whoever invested will want to know where their money went. And me, I'll be in more debt than I can handle." Brian felt a tightness in his chest, not because he felt rejected, but because that woman had a conviction he no longer found in almost anyone around him. "Have you always been like this?" "Like what?" "Independent. It's not a choice. It's survival." Silence settled between them. A mate vendor shouted in the background, the muffled noise of the city already picking up. Brian stepped back and sat on the same bench as the day before. He watched the hustle around him, but couldn't take his eyes off her. Joanna returned to work with the same energy, serving each customer with precision. Her body moved naturally, like she was born for this, like that stretch of sand was her rightful stage. Brian thought of all the times he'd invested in promising startups with flawless pitches, but no soul. How many meetings with people who only talked about projections, scalability, profits? And there was Joanna, who turned down even spare change because she believed it would cost her control over her own path. It bothered him, and at the same time, made him admire her even more. Hours later, as she began to pack up the cart, he approached again. "Can I help you push it?" "No need." "I know. But can I?" She hesitated. "All right, but just to the end of the boardwalk. After that, I've got it." Brian smiled and grabbed one side of the cart. It was heavier than it looked. As they walked, the breeze picked up, lifting the tarp slightly and revealing the few remaining sweets. "Do you usually sell out?" he asked. "Not always, but I'm back the next day." You seem like you're always on the move." "Stopping is a luxury." The two walked in silence for a few steps, the sound of traffic on the avenue mixed with the waves. Brian knew he hadn't earned her trust, but maybe for the first time he'd managed to crack that strong shell she carried, even if just a little. He still didn't know how, but something told him he wouldn't be able to leave this city without seeing her again, without understanding a little more of the world she carried within herself. And for the first time in a long while, it wasn't out of curiosity, it was admiration. And maybe, just maybe, need. "Hand me the small box first," Joanna said, leaning toward the side of the cart. Brian, sweating under the harsh sun, lifted the lid of the cooler and pulled out a tray of cocadas, handing it to her carefully. "This one? That's the one. The passion fruit goes on top, or it breaks." It was the 4th day in a row he'd shown up. Not just to buy cocadas, that part took less than 2 minutes, but to help. Really help. He'd started out shyly, offering to push the cart at the end of the morning. Then he offered to hold the umbrella while she set it up. Today he was unloading boxes before she even asked. Joanna glanced at him occasionally, not quite sure what he was after, but she didn't stop him either. "Don't you have anything better to do?" she asked while organizing change in a tin can. "I do, but nothing that makes me feel this useful." She made a face, as if doubting the answer, but didn't push further. The foot traffic picked up as the sun climbed higher. Kids ran around with buckets, mothers straightened out towels, couples applied sunscreen, and vendors sold everything: sunglasses, grilled cheese, bracelets, bikinis, hammocks. But around Joanna's cart, there was a steady, quiet stream of people who already knew the quality of what she made. Brian watched every detail. The care she took with the wax paper, the way she greeted some customers by name, her firmness in refusing handouts, and her ease with handling jokes. The 3rd time he helped her push the cart back to the boardwalk, she finally spoke without taking her eyes off the path. "My son made that drawing taped to the side." "The one with the kid holding the cocada?" "Yeah. It's great. He's 7, said if people saw the drawing, they'd smile before even tasting the sweet." Brian looked at the image. The boy was smiling with 2 teeth missing, his round eyes full of innocent joy. He was right. Joanna gave a faint smile, but kept walking. "My grandmother used to say good food starts with the story that comes with it." "And she taught you the recipes?" "Everyone. She sold coconut candies at traffic lights in Caxias. When she got sick, I started making cocadas with her." Brian walked alongside, listening intently. Her story didn't come in speeches. It came in short, direct sentences, like someone who didn't have time for embellishment. "Does your son help you?" "He mostly gets in the way, but he keeps me company, and he's a good little artist." They stopped near a low wall where they usually rested for a few minutes. Joanna opened a smaller box and pulled out a different kind of wrapping, tied with a red ribbon. "Made a new recipe. Want to try it?" Brian took it gently. "Passion fruit?" "Yeah." With a touch of clove. He took a bite, closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded with a smile. "It's different, but really good." She grabbed another cocada and sat on the wall. The movement of the beach began to blend into background music. A little farther down, a group of water and corn vendors gathered with a guitar. Within seconds, the first chords of an old samba filled the air. Brian watched as one of them started to sing, and the others clapped along, turning empty buckets and spoons into makeshift instruments. Joanna looked at them with familiarity. It was as if everyone there was part of a big, informal family, bound by survival and resilience. "Does this happen every evening?" Brian asked. "When there's time, yeah." "You sing? Only when no one's listening?" He laughed, and so did she. For the first time, her laugh was unguarded, open, without filters. Brian felt something shift in that moment. A strange kind of comfort, like he was suddenly in a place where nothing belonged to him, but everything made sense. Joanna picked up another cocada, split it in half, and offered him a piece. "This one's a bit softer. Didn't stay on the fire long enough. Perfect just like that." They ate in silence, watching the group of vendors sing. A young woman began to dance barefoot, spinning her arms as if the ground belonged to her. "Do you miss home?" Joanna asked, not looking at him. Sometimes, but lately less and less. What brought you here? Brian hesitated. I wanted to rest, clear my head. And did it work? Not yet. She looked at him, and for a moment there was no sound, no voices, no guitar, no honking from the avenue. Just that still moment where eyes say everything the mouth can't. Joanna looked away and stood up. Time to head back. Brian stood as well, wrapping up the rest of the cocada in a napkin. Can I push the cart again? Not today. All right. She was already packing up the boxes, and he understood. That conversation, that moment, had been enough for now. As she walked off with the cart, Brian stayed there, watching. The late afternoon light painted everything in golden hues, and even in silence, the sound that echoed most in his mind was her laugh. Unexpected, light, and for some reason, impossible to forget. That's him, exclaimed a young man, pointing his phone at Brian. The American who helps the cocada lady. Brian, standing next to Joanna's cart, frowned in confusion. Joanna, on the other hand, simply slammed the cooler lid shut, harder than usual. What? Brian asked, leaning slightly toward her. Joanna didn't answer right away. She just grabbed a plastic bag and started organizing the empty wrappers. Someone took a picture of us yesterday. Must have posted it somewhere, she said curtly, avoiding eye contact. Brian took the young man's phone, which he held out eagerly. The screen showed a clear image, him and Joanna sitting on the wall, sharing a cocada, with the group of vendors playing guitar in the background. The caption read, "The mysterious American who helps the cocada vendor at Posto 5. Where did this end up? A local blog, Beach People. It went viral. Look at the comments," the guy said, grinning. Brian handed the phone back and looked at Joanna, whose face remained tense. "I didn't know about this," he said quietly. "Neither did I," she replied, "but it looks like now everyone does." The day, which had started like the others, quickly proved it would be different. In less than an hour, the number of customers surged. Tourists approached curiously, asking, "Is this where the American helps out?" Some even posed for photos with Brian in the background. Joanna kept selling with her usual speed, but the smile was gone from her face. She worked faster, colder, and with every customer who mentioned the sweet internet story, her expression hardened a little more. "You're the gringo from the photo?" asked a woman in a sun hat, her accent unmistakably from São Paulo. "Yes, that's me." "Oh, how lovely. Are you two a couple?" Before Brian could respond, Joanna cut in. "Just a customer." The woman laughed awkwardly, grabbed a cocada, and walked away. The sun climbed higher, and the foot traffic was nearly 3 times the usual. Nearby vendors started noticing. Some just watched, but others didn't bother hiding their looks. Around noon, as Brian bent down to grab a box, a savory pie vendor a few stalls down said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Easy to sell like that, with gringo marketing on your side." Joanna pretended not to hear it, but Brian froze in place. "Was he talking to you?" he asked, staring at her. "No, but he was talking about me." Brian turned toward the man, but Joanna gently grabbed his arm. "Let it go, it's not worth it. But you can't just let that slide. Brian, this place has its own rules. One of them is, don't draw too much attention." He took a deep breath, trying to swallow the frustration. He looked around. What had once felt like a familiar, almost welcoming environment now felt surrounded by eyes that judged, whispered, and measured. Later, as they packed up, she paused for a moment and said, "The beach has a balance. When one cart starts selling too much, the others sell less, and around here everyone notices when things tip out of the ordinary. But you didn't do anything wrong. It's not about right or wrong, it's about coexistence." She yanked the tarp over the remaining sweets with more force than usual. Brian was still holding a box in his hands, hesitating to say what he really wanted to. "I just wanted to help." Joanna looked at him, this time with less anger and more exhaustion. "I know. But now I need you to stop showing up while I'm working, at least for a while." It felt like a slap with a velvet glove. "You want me to leave?" "I'm not sending you away. I'm asking for space." Brian nodded slowly. "All right." She took the box from his hands, loaded it into the cart and pushed it on her own. He stood there unmoving, watching her silhouette grow smaller. The sound of the cart's wheels against the ground grew fainter until it disappeared into the background noise of the beach. That afternoon, he wandered aimlessly along the shore, trying to figure out how something so simple had gotten so complicated. He sat at a beachside kiosk, ordered a coffee that was far too weak, and stared out at the ocean as if it might offer an answer. Maybe he had crossed a line he didn't even know existed, or maybe it was the same mistake all over again, thinking that helping was just about good intentions. But now, more than ever, he wanted to fix it. He just didn't know how. Yet. "How much for that kiosk?" Brian asked, pointing to the abandoned structure on the sidewalk near the fort of Copacabana. The beachfront administrator adjusted his glasses and looked over his clipboard. "You want to rent it?" "Yes, for a month." The man flipped through a few pages. "It's been out of use for a while, but if you just want the space, we can work something out. You'd need to pay a temporary use fee and cover maintenance." "Can you email me all the details? I want to close this today." For the past 3 days, Brian had avoided any contact with Joanna. He watched from a distance, sometimes hidden among beach umbrellas, other times leaning from the hotel balcony with a discreet pair of binoculars he bought at a sporting goods store. She looked more tired than before. The buzz from the viral photo had faded, but there was still a lingering stir around her. What used to be admiration from customers was now tinged with murmurs and suspicious glances from fellow vendors. Brian knew he had somehow disrupted a system he barely understood, and the only way to fix it wasn't just stepping back, but restoring balance. That's when the idea came. A fair, a festival, a full day dedicated to the beach's artisanal sweet vendors. No name of his attached, no headlines, no blog photos, a celebration of what they were already doing, just in a safe space with more structure and more visibility. The next morning, Brian returned to the kiosk with a local contractor. "I want simple wooden stands, light in color, covered with white canvas. Enough space for at least 15 vendors, basic lighting but tasteful, and background music, nothing over the top. We can do that in 3 days, then do it." Over the next few days, Brian dove headfirst into organizing. He spoke with artisans, longtime beachfront vendors, printed flyers, hired local musicians, arranged for new tents, borrowed coolers, and even partnered with a hostel to provide free water for the vendors. All under one condition: his name stayed out of it. Conversations with vendors were handled by a young assistant he'd hired just for the event. His name was Leo, 23 years old, an event management student. The idea is to create a day of celebration. Each vendor gets their own space, sets their own prices, sells their own product. No competition, no interference. "All the money is yours," Leo repeated, following Brian's instructions. Word spread fast. In a world where every cent mattered, the chance to sell at a free event in a busy tourist spot with no rental fees sounded too good to be true. "Who's behind this?" a Quindim vendor asked. "A cultural support group, pilot project." No one pushed too hard. In the end, what mattered was the opportunity to sell. Joanna heard about the festival from some friends. "It's just for sweet vendors?" she asked, curious, while cutting warm cocadas. "Seems like it," replied a woman who sold gourmet brigadeiros. "They're setting up near that old kiosk by the fort, totally free." "I get suspicious when something's too free," Joanna said, skeptical. "But it looks legit. The booths are already up." Still hesitant, Joanna decided to check it out the evening before. She arrived late in the afternoon, the sun low in the sky, and was impressed by the setup. White canvas tents stretched tight, clean wooden tables, a small stage for live music, decorative crates filled with tropical plants. It all felt like it had been done with care. A man in a vest was organizing spots with a clipboard in hand. "Just fill out this form. Name, product, phone number. Everyone gets their own little sign," he explained. Joanna hesitated, but in the end she filled it out. "My name is Joanna. I sell artisanal cocadas." "Cocadas will be a highlight. Don't worry." On the morning of the festival, the sky was clear, and a soft breeze blew in from the sea. The setup was complete, vendors were excited, and little by little, curious tourists and local residents began to gather. Joanna arrived with her cart at 9 a.m. sharp. She wore a light blouse, her hair tied back with a blue ribbon, and her son's drawing was taped to the side, more firmly than ever. She was greeted by a smiling staff member. "Your spot is right up front. We already set out some crates to help you get organized." Before long, the air was filled with the smell of coconut, caramelized sugar, molasses, and passion fruit. The crowd grew by the minute. Cell phone cameras popped up, kids sampled sweets, and returned with their parents to buy more. The background music blended samba, bossa nova, and soft guitar. The event unfolded naturally. No fuss, no hype. Brian watched everything from a distance, sitting at the back of a nearby kiosk, wearing a cap and sunglasses. Leo kept him updated. "Joanna's selling like never before. She's restocked her tray twice already." "And the others?" "Everyone's pumped. A woman who sells banana candy said it's her best sales day in 5 years." Brian nodded, his eyes still on Joanna. She was smiling. Not the tight, practical smile of her regular days, but a light, free one. She laughed with the woman next to her, showed her son's drawing to a French couple, let a little girl touch the cart. She looked at peace. Brian didn't go near. He didn't need to. The festival was hers. It belonged to all of them. At the end of the day, as the sun began to set, the vendors started packing up. There was still movement, but the peak had passed. Joanna wiped down her counter with a damp cloth when a young woman approached. "Did you know this event was organized by some mystery gringo?" "I heard," Joanna said, still cleaning. "They say he's around here somewhere, just watching." Joanna paused for a second, looked around. Nothing. Just tourists and locals strolling by. But deep down, she knew. She knew he was there. And even without seeing him, she knew he'd understood. That this time, he'd gotten it right. And for the first time in days, she didn't feel watched. She felt respected. She felt free. "Quick, grab the tarp," someone shouted from the left side of the fair, just as the first raindrops began to fall. Brian jumped up from the plastic chair where he'd been hiding. The sky, which minutes earlier had only been cloudy, now unleashed its downpour without warning. Heavy, thick drops fell like buckets over the freshly built setup of the Sweets Festival. Vendors ran in all directions, trying to save boxes, jars, trays, and bags. "Cover this," a woman yelled, struggling to hold a makeshift tarp over her tray of coconut candies. Joanna looked up at the dark sky, took a deep breath, and started pulling out the tarp she'd left folded behind her counter. A thunderclap rolled in the distance, drowning out the sound of rushed footsteps on the wooden floor. That's when Brian appeared. No umbrella, no concern for his soaked sneakers, crossing the flooded festival grounds as if the rain didn't exist. "Joanna," he called, already pulling another tarp from a pile in the corner. "Let's cover this side." She looked at him, surprised, but said nothing. She just nodded and crouched to help him. "Careful with the cocadas in the back, those aren't set yet," she said, as she pulled the plastic over the trays. The wind picked up. Some of the tents looked like they might topple. A decorative panel fell with a loud crack, and flyers scattered across the wet ground. Brian turned to Leo, who was already sprinting from one side to the other. "Tie it down! Wrap it around the posts!" Within minutes, they were both soaked, clothes clinging to their bodies, hair dripping. But they kept going, carrying boxes, pulling ropes, covering other vendors' stands when they couldn't keep up alone. Joanna watched as Brian lifted a side structure that had collapsed under the weight of the water. He braced himself with both hands against the wood, drenched to the bone, eyes focused, feet sunk into the forming mud. "You should go. You'll end up getting sick," she said, stepping closer. "I didn't come to watch, I came to help." She didn't answer, but stayed beside him, holding down the tarp corner that threatened to rip away. Other vendors joined in. Within minutes, they had improvised extra coverings with plastic sheets, plywood, even beach umbrellas. Despite the rain, no one left. Despite the chaos, the stands were saved. Despite the storm, the festival didn't stop. When the worst of it passed and the downpour became a persistent drizzle, the setup was still standing. Wet? Yes. A mess? no doubt, but alive. The customers who had stayed took shelter under the awnings, laughing at the situation. Some even chimed in, first time eating cocada in the rain. Now this is a real street fair. Joanna, hands still trembling, pulled the tarp off her counter and checked the sweets that had survived. Most were intact. Brian approached, his white shirt completely transparent, skin flushed from the cold. He was out of breath but smiling. "We saved everything." Joanna handed him a cloth. "You're shaking." He wiped his face, not taking his eyes off her. "Totally worth it." She stayed silent for a moment, then pointed to a bucket that had filled to the brim with rainwater. "That bucket was full of cocadas. You saved it." "I didn't do it alone." "But you did." Brian looked around. The other vendors were now cleaning up, regrouping their products, reassembling their stands like nothing had happened. The sky was beginning to open, a golden stripe cut through the grey clouds, a quiet promise that the worst had passed. Joanna stepped a little closer. "Why all of this?" "Because I saw what you do, I saw the value, I saw how hard you all fight, and because—" He paused, took a breath. "Because you taught me that not all help is charity." She looked at him for a long moment, and for the first time, he saw her eyes truly soft. Not tired, not guarded, just open. Joanna nodded slightly, barely a movement. "All right then." A vendor walked over with a thermos of hot coffee. "Here, gringo, you earned it." Brian took the plastic cup and nodded in thanks. Joanna laughed. "Now you're officially part of the chaos." He smiled back. "I think that's what I wanted from the start." The sun finally broke through, reflecting in the puddles on the ground, casting a strange, almost magical glow over the fair. There, among wet tarps, rescued jars, and still fresh cocadas, Joanna realized something she could no longer deny. He wasn't there to be seen or to save. He was there to stay, even without knowing what came next, even with no promises, just because he wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, that was the rarest gesture of all. "So it was you, wasn't it?" Joanna said, holding a still damp dish towel in her hands. Brian slowly turned his head as if he'd known this moment would come. He was leaning against a post at the edge of the kiosk, watching the end of the festival with eyes still marked by exhaustion. "Who told you?" "The guy from the coffee stand. Said the American in the cap paid for everything." Brian didn't answer right away. He just lowered his gaze, half smiling. "I thought I could go unnoticed." Joanna crossed her arms, but the gesture wasn't defensive. It was thoughtful, like someone trying to understand. "Why hide it?" "Because it wasn't about me." The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the exact space needed between question and answer. "You could have told me." "And what would have changed?" He looked up. "Would you have accepted it the same way?" She didn't reply. Around them, vendors were still packing up the last of their things. The sun had already set, but the sky remained lit with hues of orange, blue, and violet. The warm glow of the streetlights reflected in the puddles left behind by the rain on the wooden floor. Brian pushed off from the pillar and walked slowly to the center of the space. He stopped there, in the middle of what was now an empty structure, as if trying to take in everything that had happened that day. "All the profits went to you," he said, still facing away. "I didn't keep a cent." "I don't want to." Joanna approached, now with calm, steady steps. "I know." He turned to her. His shirt had mostly dried on his body, but his hair was still damp. "When I met you on that street, you didn't want anything in return. And you didn't understand that at the time. Only now." She looked over at her cart, parked near the entrance, her son's drawing still taped firmly to the side. "You know what's hardest for people like us?" she said, without looking at him. "It's not the heat or the weight or even the rain. It's believing that there are still gestures out there that don't expect anything back." Brian nodded slowly. "I expected too much, for years. From life, from people. I thought generosity was just an investment. That everything given had to come back doubled. And now I just want to be here and walk with you." She looked at him again. Her eyes no longer held the barrier they had days before. They were clear. Then come. Joanna walked to the cart, pulled the cloth from over it and folded it carefully. She opened one of the boxes and took out a small package wrapped in different paper, thicker, white, tied with a neat blue ribbon. She handed it to him. It's from the original recipe, but made today, special. Brian took the package with both hands like it was fragile. When he opened it, he saw a cocada wrapped in a napkin with a black and white printed drawing. The same drawing. My son's, yeah, but today he wanted to give you a new version. The drawing was more detailed now, the lines more defined. The child still held the cocada, but now there were two other figures beside him, one tall, wearing a cap, and the other with her hair tied back. All three smiling. Brian swallowed hard. He knows who I am? He knows you showed up when I needed silence, and helped without making noise. They looked at each other for several long seconds. Neither seemed in a hurry to break the moment. Then Joanna pulled the cart gently. Help me push? Of course. They walked together along the beachfront, the sound of the waves breaking rhythmically beside them. The beach was nearly empty now, but the air still carried the scent of coconut salt and soft sea breeze. Sometimes help doesn't come to change everything, she said. It just comes to remind us we're not alone. Brian smiled, his eyes wet. And that changes everything. They kept walking side by side, unhurried. The streetlights stretched long shadows across the mosaic stones of the boardwalk. Up ahead, the sun was gone, but gold still shimmered faintly on the waves. Joanna laughed at something he whispered, and he laughed with her. The cocada was still in his hand, now half-eaten. The cart rolled gently over the stones, without rush. The city around them had no idea what had happened at that festival, or in the days leading up to it. But there, in that quiet walk between two strangers who had found each other, something had shifted, and once again, the silence said it all. Hear what it meant to you. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons. This is really important for the channel. Really important. And if you're ready for another story of love and hope, click the first card or the second one to watch the full playlist. See you there.